Good evening, everyone. Thank you for your patience while we got things set up. I think traffic kind of held everybody up tonight, so we appreciate your patience and we apologize for starting late. My name is Darcy Brandon. I am the event director for Citizens for Quality Education. And I would like to thank you all for coming out this evening and learning more about Common Core. So Citizens for Quality Education, or CQE for short, is a nonpartisan group of civic-minded individuals who noticed a fundamental change in how American children are being educated. This change is resulting in an erosion of knowledge, learning versus skills, attitudes, and beliefs. It's resulting in erosion of local control for our parents, teachers, and school boards, and the lack of privacy for our children and families. CQE began in 2012 to ask some very simple questions of their local school board, which was the Poway Unified School District. And these questions were met with staunch resistance, outright refusal to answer, and deceitful responses. We soon began to realize the true lack of accountability which exists regarding the education of our children, not only in Poway, but all over San Diego County, all over California, and all over the country. CQE strives to inform parents about these educational changes, to encourage them to learn how these changes will affect their children's lives and what their rights are as parents. We hope to provide the many good teachers and educators with truths about what the implementation of Common Core aligned high-stakes testing will mean to them and their ability to teach as they desire. These truths are being withheld or distorted by many school districts, political, media, and corporate stakeholders. Citizens for Quality Education consists of a growing number of parents who are concerned about the privacy of their children and have an interest in how their children are being educated and what they are being taught. We encourage every parent to become involved, educate themselves about the educational system, and make informed decisions on behalf of their children. You may be only one voice, but when you join the growing number of parents, grandparents, and citizens who oppose Common Core and the intrusion of the federal government and corporations into our children's lives, we become very loud. And we will not be ignored, dismissed, or marginalized. You can find us on Facebook, or Citizens for Quality Education, San Diego, North County, or our website, www.sdcque.com. And please make sure that we have your email so that we can notify you of other events we have planned in our area. There's also on the back of your programs a list of other San Diego Facebook groups that you can join to get connected. So here's your call to action, which we're going to start with tonight, so that when you're listening to our speakers, you can decide what you would like to do and how you would like to get involved. You need to get involved with your school district. You need to start showing up to school board meetings. Get on your school board's agenda with items that are concerning to you. Educate the public. Call your state elected officials, so your state assemblyman or your state senator, and opt your children out of the testing, because with only a 5% opt-out rate, it invalidates the test scores. Yeah. When you opt your children out, and when a school district gets 5%, it's only 5%, it's not a lot, it invalidates the test scores. And it then destroys and makes the whole system implode on itself. So in a school district of about 700 children, That's a classroom of 35 children. That's not a lot to ask, I don't think. So, what are some local opportunities? Create or join a local CQE group. We have some in Poway, Carlsbad, Chula Vista, Santee, Valley Center, and we are hoping to grow more. So you can contact Mary Baker, and that's her email up there, if you would like to get involved or start your own CQE group. We are also having an informational table at the North County Mall up in Escondido. And you can do these at any Westfield shopping center. You just have to ask management and set up a table and provide information to the public on Common Core. And then we are also having weekly meetings. So if you'd like to contact me, my email is up there, and I would be happy to connect you with one of our existing groups. Oh, yeah, it's DK, as in kite, DARCE, as in Edward, at gmail.com. You're welcome. Okay, now we have some upcoming events. This is the list of all the Southern California Unveiling Common Core events. We are November 12th, San Diego. Tomorrow evening, our speakers will be in Chino Hills. The 15th, they will be in Murrieta. On the 16th, Palos Verdes. On the 17th, they are going to be at a hearing with the Orange County Department of Education, and it's called Common Core on Trial. And on the 19th, they're going to be in the hospital. Either that or at Disneyland, I don't know. Taking a vacation. Okay, so I just wanted to take care of a few housekeeping things, and then we'll get on with the program. Please turn off or mute your cell phones. Restrooms are located in the back of the room on the other side of the hallway. We also have water stations here if you need a drink of water during the program. During question and answer, we are going to be using note cards, and I have some ushers who will be passing out note cards. If you have questions, please just raise your hand. They'll walk around and make sure you get a note card, and then you can submit it. And then at the end of the program, we'll do the Q&A. Also, in the back of the room, we have some tables with information on alternative school choices and some other general information. There's also a book that is a compilation of essays, and each of our speakers have written an essay in that, and those are available for $25. It's called Common Ground on Common Core. Next, I would like to thank all of our volunteers, because this is never a single person endeavor. I would like to thank Laura and Bobby Jones, Kelly Schaefer, Gary Barnes, Mary Baker, Steve Sarviel, Dave Wainwright, Wayne Rounslow, Cindy Smith, and there's probably many others who have helped out in some capacity. I'd also like to give a special thanks to Dr. Jim Davies for sponsoring our videographer. As you can imagine, events like this do take money, and so while we are offering this as a free event, we are asking for your donations so that we may continue to offer these programs. And just as an idea, tonight's program came to just under $3,000. So we appreciate anything that you are able to help us with.
What do we donate?
We'll have donation boxes coming around during the Q&A period, and we also have one out in the lobby. So good question. Thank you. Okay. Without any further ado, I would like to introduce our speakers very briefly. First, we will have Dr. James Milgram. He is Professor Emeritus of Mathematics at Stanford University and the only mathematician who was on the Validation Committee for Common Core. Secondly, we'll have Zev Werman, who is a visiting scholar with the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. He's the former senior policy advisor at the U.S. Department of Education and was on the California Academic Content Standards Commission. And last, but certainly not least, is Dr. Sandra Stotsky, Professor Emerita, University of Arkansas, and unique standards expert on the Common Core Validation Committee. And next, I would like to introduce our moderator for this evening, Mary Baker. Mary is a graduate of Middlebury College and acting president of the San Diego Orange County chapter of the nonprofit organization Citizens Alliance for Property Rights. Mary is a guest speaker in the Southern California region, and in 2013, she launched a workshop and an accompanying training manual called How to Become a Citizen Ninja. This workshop teaches citizens how to engage in the civic process effectively, how to engage in civil discourse, and how to neutralize bullies who want to silence them. Mary's work is being published this spring with her first book, tentatively called Stand Up to Power. Mary is also a co-founder and member of Citizens for Quality Education, San Diego. Please welcome Mary Baker.
Hi, welcome, everybody. It's really good to see you. So I was thinking about what I wanted to say to you tonight in preparation for these wonderful experts who've traveled very, very far distances to meet you tonight and to give you their information. And honestly, this whole thing makes me think of The Matrix. You know, that movie with Neo? Where he's given a choice to take the red pill or not, to see or not to see the truth behind what seems to be going on. And you know, you realize tonight you're going to be taking a red pill. You realize that, but the problem with the red pill is that it comes with responsibility. So if you don't want to be or feel responsibility after tonight, you might want to go. Because as you know, once you hear the truth about something, you can't ignore it anymore. It gnaws at you. And you feel compelled to do something. And this is what's exciting about the red pill. And 5 years ago, a speaker came to San Diego to talk about controversial property rights topic. And I was interested in this, and so I went to hear what she had to say. Well, by the end of that day, I felt like someone had stuffed 5 red pills down my throat. I had a headache for days because the truth was just it was so crazy. I didn't realize how my rose-colored glasses were. That awakening was a turning point in my life. And for the first time, I understood the Matrix. The program running behind the feel-good and the warm and fuzzy terms to convince us that everything is going to be okay and we should just follow everything they tell us to do. So I started observing, reading, researching, asking questions. I was like, how did we get here? How did we come to this place? How did we get to an America where bureaucrats trump local jurisdiction, where administrative rules are subordinating the people's rule of law, where freedom of speech and states' rights are relegated to a junk pile of irrelevance, where we no longer trust the people who we elect to run our government, where school board members are dictated to by overbearing superintendents and experts, where our children, the future leaders and governors of our great country, are being used as pawns in a game of thrones by powerful political elites and greedy corporations. Well, to borrow a teenage maxim, is this real life? So since that red pill moment that changed my life and got me into becoming an activist, I never thought I would be an activist in my life, I actually became a speaker because I had things to talk about. I had things to share. And then I realized people didn't know what to do with the information. So I developed a program to train people how to engage effectively in civic discourse and on how to become a citizen ninja. Not a ninja warrior with like neo tricks, but a citizen ninja, one who is effective, knows how to talk, have civil discourse, not alienate themselves or marginalize themselves, keep their credibility, be a professional. Now, traveling around, many people will say to me, or they'll tell me, they're angry about their own awakening. Maybe some of you feel this way. You're already angry. They're upset that instead of spending time doing fun activities with their families, they now have to spend their time engaging in the public arena as activists and going to city council meetings, planning board meetings and school board meetings. How boring. But you know what? I look at them and I just smile. I smile because I was that person once, long ago, 5 years ago. I was that angry person. But what I discovered by getting involved was that my anger went away because I was doing something. To me, this is a silver lining. And I hope that after our 3 speakers have dished out their own dose of truth tonight, you will see it as a positive turning point for you. Jim, Zev, and Sandra will provide clarity on some of the more granular aspects of Common Core. The question is now, what will you do with it after tonight? The good news is that the matrix can be disrupted. How? By talking about what you learn here tonight with others. School board members, other parents, neighbors, your family. You can affect change through action and your voice. Request robust debate. Ask questions. Engage in civil discourse. Demand transparency, better communication, accountability. Run interference. Don't be afraid. There is hope, and we can feel optimistic. Why? Because you're here tonight, and we can work together. Remember Reagan? Remember when he said the most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help"? Show them who's boss and stand up to power. But now I'd like to introduce our first panelist, Dr. James Milgram. He is a professor of mathematics at Stanford University. He has served on the board of directors for the National Institute for Education Sciences, the NASA Advisory Council, and the Achieve Mathematics Advisory Panel. He is one of the original 25 members of the Common Core Validation Committee, as well as the Common Core Mathematics Writing Team. From 2002 to 2005, Professor Milgram headed a project funded by the U.S. Department of Education that identified and described the key mathematics that K-8 teachers need to know. He also helped to direct a project partially funded by the Thomas B. Fordham Foundation that evaluated state mathematics assessments. He was one of the 4 main authors of the 97 to 2010 California Mathematics Standards, as well as one of the 2 main authors of the California Mathematics Framework. He was also one of the main advisors for the mathematics standards previous to Common Core in Florida, Georgia, Massachusetts, Michigan, Minnesota, New Mexico, and Texas. Among other honors, he has held the Gauss Professorship at the University of Göttingen, and the Regents Professorship at the University of New Mexico, and has published over 100 research papers in mathematics and 4 books, as well as serving as an editor of many others. He currently works on questions in robotics and protein folding. He received his undergraduate and master's degrees in mathematics from the University of Chicago and a Ph.D. in mathematics from the University of Minnesota. Dr. Milgram.
How do we get this up?
I'll do it, but you figure out how to turn that on.
It should be on. Is it on? No. Okay, good.
Is this?
This is different. Thank you. Okay, so let's see. hopefully this has good enough range.
Just push that to advance the screen.
Which, this one? Okay, on this side. All right. Yeah, well, I'll fool around with it and find out how it works. Okay. Okay, well, thank you, Darcy. Thank you for all the wonderful work you've done and the help and the valuable resource that you're becoming for Southern California. So I'm going to stand in front of you in a way today as a historian. Not that I am one, but that's never stopped the people in Common Core. So I'm going to be a historian tonight. What I'm going to talk about is the internal, the insider history of the Common Core project and some of the key things that didn't happen and did happen that you don't know about and might be very useful to know. So let's start out, see if this works. Well, that's not so good. Okay, I get too many letters like this. It's a shame that the 1997 standards that you helped write, which our ninth grade daughter basically still gets to take, staying just ahead of the disaster behind her, have been replaced. We already can see a huge difference between our two daughters, the seventh grade experience. 2 years ago, our older daughter came home excited and engaged with Algebra 1 in seventh grade. So she was a little advanced. She was taking the Algebra 1 in seventh grade, but the percentage by the time this thing ended, the 1998 to 2010 experiment, that there were more and more kids taking algebra in seventh grade. And incidentally, for what it's worth, that is the standard internationally. Internationally, algebra is accepted as a seventh grade course, not eighth grade, not ninth grade, but seventh grade. So this is very, very encouraging that a really significant percentage of our kids were catching up with international expectations. Of course, this year, her younger sister, who came into seventh grade eager to be excited, is getting more and more bored. And we're hearing stories all over the place of kids who are crying, who are upset, who are totally confused. And there seems to be a larger and larger desire on the part of people that Common Core should just go away. It's worth noting that there was an election last Tuesday, I guess. Yes. And I think a really key point in this election was that 6 of the state superintendents of education throughout the country, who were staunch supporters of Common Core, got defeated by people that initially weren't given much of a chance, whose main platform was, the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of it. So the world outside of California is getting interesting. Okay, I see that the problem here is that we have sliced off the top. The problems with Common Core. What? Click what again? So the problems with Common Core is here, but it's not up there. Yeah. Well, there's nothing we can do about it, so he's going to do something about it. Okay. Well, there we go. Okay. All right, now let's hope that random stuff in the middle there goes away. Okay, it did. Good. All right. So now let me give you this oral history that I started out mentioning I would do. The problems with Common Core. Well, the structure of the hierarchy that was writing Common Core was that a visible structure, visible hierarchy, was that there was a writing team that in mathematics consisted of about 25 individuals, and I was nominally one of them. But there are three lead writers. One of them is, the first of them, or the least of them, was Mr. Phil Darrow, who is local to California. The actual lead writer was William McCullum, who's at the University of Arizona in the math department. He's a mathematician. And the middle one, three bears, you know. The middle one was Jason Zimba, who was a instructor at Bennington in mathematical physics. So we had two mathematicians and one Mr. For what it's worth, the Mr. was the main author of the 1992 California Framework. He was also the main author of the standards in New Jersey 4 years ago. He was also the main author of the first attempt at standards in Georgia, and the governor of Georgia had to come to me to put together somebody to undo it. I think most of us can remember that far back. 1992 precipitated the math wars. And yeah, so that means and New Jersey was equally bad. New Jersey also had to be redone from scratch. So that's the record of the first of the authors, or third. And it's worth knowing that. Then we have the validation committee that actually was supposed to oversee both the English language arts, which Sandy Stotsky will talk about at length, and the mathematics. And that's the only two standards that are part of the Common Core, just English language arts and mathematics. So all the suffering your kids are doing is just two subjects. So, okay, let's see how this played out. Okay, so let's first of all, let's look at the charge in a little detail of the committee. So the first one, which isn't actually the main one, validate the sufficiency of the evidence supporting each college and career readiness standard. So if we found the evidence was insufficient, we could remove any standard in the original document. The second charge was to add any standard that isn't included in the document, and that they, being we, felt that it should be included if we can provide evidence that it's internationally benchmarked and is used in the high-achieving countries. So it's clear. Well, this is the evidence. Yeah, okay. So it's clear. It's clear from just this description that the intent was that Common Core was to be as good as the best international standards. It was for college and career readiness, and it was to be benchmarked. Just benchmark means nothing, because benchmark amounts to saying, oh, I looked at those standards, and they have standards vaguely like these standards. But the intent was to not only benchmark them, but match them up. That the intent was that they should be the equal of the standards of the best countries in the world. And this was the charge of the validation committee. So it was clear that our duties were to oversee entirely the development of the Common Core standards. In the end, we were the ones that controlled it, so we were the ones that should be supervising it. And now we came to a kind of weird situation. there were only 2 experts that were qualified to do some of this. I was qualified because I was the only content expert in mathematics on the committee. All the other people on the committee, well, almost none of them had any real background in mathematics, but all the other members of the committee, what they did was they taught teachers, and that's about it. Some of them did some research, but the main thing, the point of it is that they were involved in teacher training. And Sandy was the other one who actually had knowledge that was actually relevant to the project. She had guided the 2, well, certainly the Massachusetts English and Language Arts standards, which were universally agreed were some of the strongest in the country, and she had also played a central role in the development of the California ELA standards. And the 2 of us were the only people who had real qualifications to analyze and work with the authors of the standards. And as a result, more or less of necessity, I chose. I had no real choice. I had to work with the authors of the mathematics standards to get the best standards I could get. And well, let's see. Next slide. Nope. That wasn't it. That wasn't it at all. And keep that in mind, because now I'm going to tell you about the next thing that happened. Okay, the first draft started with math in kindergarten and ended with Algebra 1. Great. You see, the problem is that this is for career and college readiness. Okay, what about that? Just Algebra 1 does not begin to do this. In fact, to my knowledge, and it's actually extensive, Zev Werman and I did an analysis that showed that we could not find, and to my knowledge, no public 4-year college or university in the United States would even admit a student with just the preparation in Algebra 1. So what the heck did they mean by college ready? Okay, at that point, the first thing I did was the logical thing. I met with the main writers demanding much more math. And, I told them, we can't do this. We can't do this. We can't advertise this as college ready when it's something like 7% of the students with that background could even ever get a college degree in any subject. And that we really had to reach a higher level. So I said all this, and it turned out I was really wasting my time. They completely understood it. They knew, at least the 2 that I talked to, Mr. Darrow was missing. But though they really understood what I was talking about, they realized that basically both of our intent was that we didn't worry that everybody should take all the things that should be available to them. There had to be a path up to calculus in the standards. And we all agreed that this was the thing that was needed. It turned out, though, that it didn't matter because they couldn't do anything. They had been told it stops with Algebra 1.
Who told them?
That's a mystery. This is data that we have not been given, so we can make a good conjecture, but it's only a conjecture. And I'd just as soon not do it until later. So it appeared that I had to convince Achieve. That's an umbrella organization that does education work for the National Governors Association. And these were the ones that were guiding or, facilitating, let's say, the project. I had to convince the people to achieve that one needs more than Algebra 1 to be college and career ready. Obviously, not the writers. There was no disagreement with the writers. So naturally, I met with Achieve, demanding much more math. What else would I do? And it turned out to be an incredible effort. I had to spend most of the day with these people, showing them fact after fact, showing them that the previous administration had convened the National Mathematics Council, and that council had reported that the essential thing that our students had to have was algebra, and they listed the set of algebra topics that they believed was essential. And those topics included an awful lot of Algebra 2. So the previous administration, everybody that ever looked at this thing realized that you had to go higher. It didn't help. It still took us a day, or me a day, to get their attention sufficiently that a few days later, they allowed the writers to include some geometry and the material for a week Algebra 2 course. But that was it. I didn't know that was it. And I think none of us believed that was it. But that was it. They were not going to go any higher than they had just gone. So wait a second. I think we've already done that. I would say, yeah. So just for information, by way of contrast, in the high-achieving countries, typically over 90% of the population are high school graduates. Now, that sounds absurd given that we're like 60%, but that's accurate. That's actually data from Achieve. I had told them that this was the case. They spent money to disprove it. They lost. Moreover, at least half of these countries, a calculus course is required to graduate from high school. So that our weak Algebra 2 is asking incredibly little of these people, and it's going way far away from the expectations in the high-achieving countries. And then, nothing, you pay for any time you interrupt the system. That's just a rule. So within a few days of this, we got the validation committee got a letter indicating that we no longer had any authority to make or even request changes in the standards, and this was in both ELA and math. And Sandy had not interfered in ELA at that point. Instead, what we were asked to do was to sign a letter asserting that the standards were excellent. And there was no other option. You sign the letter asserting the standards are excellent, or you don't sign it. And they try to remove all record of you from having been on validation. So that was what they changed. They changed our charge. And in particular, what this means is that the Common Core standards were never validated.
Wow.
There was no research that was checked and verified that supports the Common Core standards. So consider that, and then think about what your kids are going through, and then draw the obvious conclusion. So my position, and I think Sandy's also, but she'll tell you, was simple. Since the standards were far from being either excellent or even benchmarked to the level of typical international expectations, I simply refused to sign the letter. And so did Sandy, and so did a total of 5 of us. So now 5 of us refused to sign. And in the world of education, there were 25, at this point, there were 25 members of validation, and 5 of us refused to sign. Now that is huge. In the world of education, to have 20% of the members of a committee refuse to go along, that's kind of extraordinary, believe it or not. So there were a lot of people on that committee who actually looked at what the situation was. Okay, apropos of this, or not, I mentioned something about my conversations with the author, the main writers, and the fact that they fully understood my issues, and indeed they too agreed that a path to calculus was the appropriate level in the Common Core. So let me give you some details here. Of course, you know, we all felt that the standards were woefully weak, you know. And I'll give you data in a minute. I mean, you know, a mathematician can only go so far with words. So here's a statement, a verbatim statement from an audio tape of a presentation of William McCullum in January of 2010. It's not what we aspire to for our children. It's not what we as a nation want to set as a final deliverable. I completely agree with that, and we should go beyond that. At that point, he was talking about the January draft and something about what was going to be he already knew the material that was going to be in the next draft in March, public draft. None of you saw the private drafts. And, you know, and so that was the one that at that time just ended with Algebra 2, but he fully expected it to go on up to a path to calculus. And so he then, I haven't quoted the rest of his statement, he then, you know, assured the mathematicians in the audience, this was at the national meeting of the American Math Society, he assured the mathematicians that, in fact, it was everybody's intent to go up to calculus, and that parts of it were already there. What is it? I'm done?
No.
Okay, I see. All right. Was already so. It turned out though that March draft was by far the strongest draft that there was. That draft had some of the more advanced material. It got removed before the final draft. All they had in there was Algebra 1, weak geometry, weak Algebra 2. That was it. And that's what you got in Common Core. Okay, for what that's worth, here's the comment from the second lead author. And this is from Jason Zimba in March of 2010. The standards are for the colleges most kids go to, but not the colleges most parents aspire to.
Wow.
What does that mean? Well, actually, we find he got more explicit a little later. Therefore, community colleges and non-selective colleges and universities. The canonical example being the University of Phoenix. They are not for STEM, he went on, they are not for STEM and not for selective colleges. He pointed out, at that point he pointed out, that what Common Core means by college ready is a student who passed Algebra 2. And this is a totally circular situation. You see, we redefine what college readiness means to what is in the current version of Common Core. Okay, what does the data show? Okay, I've warned you. So let's go back, let's go to this, and let me just put up a, let's see if I can get this thing to work. I think, does it work? Yeah, there we go. Okay, along this line is Algebra 2, and this line here is the probability of graduating from getting a degree, a 4-year degree, at a college or university if you stop with that as your highest course. Now, this in 82, and that's a long time ago, it was about 46%, and then, or 42%, and now it's, and over here, 10 years later, is 39. And the best estimate of what it is today is about 1 in 3. So what they mean by college readiness is you have a 33% chance of ever getting a college degree with that preparation. Apropos of that, look at what it is. Look at what it is. Whoops, this thing. Look at what it is in Algebra 1. This was in 82, but look what happened in 92. 7%. 7% chance. Okay, it gets more reasonable. You only need one more course. These are reasonable numbers. I could accept that as a sufficient chance for being college ready. So just add trigonometry, and something's reasonable, but they wouldn't do it. Okay, so that's I already talked about. Now, we're still not done. I'm going to give you one more datum. And that's degrees in any subject. How about STEM? After all, Common Core's main selling point was that it was supposed to fix the STEM pipeline. STEM being science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. If a student with only the Common Core preparation wished to major in a STEM area, their odds of obtaining a STEM degree are 2%. That's not a misprint. It's 2%. And again, this is data from the same basic source. I'll show you where to look, but we're not going to press that. So it's right. Where'd it go? This thing isn't, oh boy, I don't know. Oh, here it is. There it is. Yeah, 2%. Yeah, it's 2%. It's right there. It's intersection of a line about the level of the course with the degree completion. So that's where we are, and that's what we have in that document. So you've seen a little bit of the Common Core history, and I think I better stop.
Thank you very much. Do I have my microphone? Wow, stunner. I told you, the red pill. You're swallowing it right now. Okay, so remember, if you have questions, raise your hand and someone will bring you a card so you can fill it out, and then when you're done, ready to turn it back in, raise your hand again and they will come and collect it. Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Milgram, for that expose. Now we're going to move to our next panelist, Zev Ehrman. He is a visiting scholar with the Hoover Institution at Stanford University. He participated in developing California's education standards and the STAR assessments in mathematics between 1995 and 2007 in various capacities. Between 2007 and 2009, he served as a senior policy advisor with the Office of Planning, Evaluation and Policy Development at the U.S. Department of Education in Washington, D.C. Throughout the development of the Common Core standards in 2009 through 2010, Werman analyzed the mathematics drafts for the Pioneer Institute and for the state of California. By the way, the Pioneer Institute has wonderful white papers on this topic. In the summer of 2010, he served on the California Academic Content Standards Commission that evaluated the suitability of the Common Core standards for California. Werman has authored evaluation reports and white papers on the Common Core for the Pioneer Institute and others, and professionally evaluated other state and national standards. He published multiple professional and opinion articles about education and about the Common Core in national media. In his non-educational life, Werman has spent 4 decades in, the easy peasy electronic and semiconductor industry. Currently, he's an executive with Monolithic 3D, a Silicon Valley semiconductor startup. He holds 16 U.S. patents and earned his bachelor's and master's degrees in electrical engineering from the Technion Israel Institute of Technology. Please welcome Zev Werman.
Good evening. Thank you for coming here and hearing my strange accent. I am always asked where I am from. I am from Palo Alto. I have lived there for 30 years. Unfortunately, I did not get rid of my accent. Prior to that, I grew up in Israel, and some more stories, but who cares? Let me tell you this. Oh, okay. How I would like to approach this talk. I basically want to look at what would a good program look like. What do we expect from a good program in mathematics? And my definition is here on the board. It's more demanding courses in high school. It's more successful at taking those demanding courses. It's more enrollment in colleges, selected, not University of Phoenix. Less remediation. In other words, you're more prepared. And if you can do it by lifting the bottom, not squashing the top, lifting the bottom, reducing the gap a bit, wonderful. I think this is my definition of a good program. And by the way, don't dilute the test, don't dilute the content. Well, I served on the California Academic Content Standard Commission when we were supposed to evaluate the Common Core. So by that time I've been familiar with the Common Core. I'm also familiar with the 1997 standards. And here is my take on the difference in how those two groups approached writing the standards. The Common Core said we are benchmarked to international standards. However, in reality, they are 1 to 2 years behind. The California standard actually tried to be almost matching, maybe 6 months behind. We knew in 1997 that we want different kids to take different options based on their interests and abilities. Common Core said everybody takes it. That's what is good enough for everyone. And then part of the fact that we, in 97 in California, we allowed choices, we realized that preparation for the workplace is not necessarily the same as preparation for academic content for universities. And therefore, we allowed paths that lead to calculus easily. And Common Core said, well, career and college readiness are one and the same. We just declared it by fiat. And you heard already how high that goes. Let us look at the evidence of this thing. The document that defined and called for establishment of the Common Core was published in late 2008 by the 3 parents of Common Core, Achieve National Government Association, AGA, and the CCSSO, the Council of Chief State School Officers. They published a document called Benchmarking for Success, and they said, look, internationally, kids by grade 8 are doing algebra. Jim mentioned some even earlier. We are 2 years behind. Guess what? True, we all agree. However, a year and a half later, when the standards were published, where did they place Algebra 1? In high school, not in 8th grade. So much for helping the STEM. Is college readiness the same as career readiness? Well, for some jobs, maybe. Most of the jobs, not. And indeed, one of the big top experts in the country is a guy called Michael Kears from Stanford. He was, at that time, he was a chief consultant to NAGBI, the National Assessment Governing Board, the people in charge of the national testing, the NAEP, to study exactly this question. Is career readiness the same as college readiness? Can we use the 12th grade NAEP test to measure both? And when the Common Core standard were published, he said, my concern is the assertion that the draft says they are essentially one and the same, but they are not. I didn't see any evidence. Today, Michael Kirst is our State Board of Education president, not anymore a professor at Stanford. He doesn't mention this issue anymore. Let's skip this. But this is Common Core in general. But we are in California. We didn't take the vanilla Common Core. That's one thing we tried to do during this academic content standard commission deliberations. Our governor at the time, Arnold Schwarzenegger, said, differently from most of the states, he said, we will not take in the Common Core unless it is at least as rigorous as what we had before. To his credit, he said it. So in 2010, our marching order was make sure they're at least as rigorous. Well, we look at it, and it's not as rigorous. As I said, algebra was placed in grade 9. Content was missing, as Jim described. So we added, in high school, a full calculus course, advanced statistics. We beefed up the missing pieces of Algebra 2, trigonometry, and so on and so forth. But we also had to do something about preparation for all this stuff. So we tried to add standards in early grades, K7, and place algebra in grade 8. That's what we had before. Well, we could place algebra course as an alternate set of standards in grade 8, because without that, Schwarzenegger would not agree to this whole game. But the commission refused to put anything in grade K7, essentially. There were a couple of standards they added that were clearly missing, because they felt there is an annual test, and we really don't want to tinker with the Common Core. To our question, but how do you expect kids to reach to algebra by grade 8 if they are not prepared by K7? There was no answer. The commission was something around 20 people. There were 2 people, myself included, that were trying to push for it. 18 basically voted the party line. You got your algebra in grade 8? Shut up, enough. All the rest, forget about it. So, at least we did half decent job, except that 2 years later, Schwarzenegger was not around anymore, the state board removed the 8th grade algebra. So now we are essentially in K8 vanilla Common Core in California. We do have a lot of content in high school potentially, except the question is, who will reach it? Who will be prepared for it? Because if you start in algebra in grade 8, well, algebra 2 in grade 9, or in grade 9, algebra 1 in grade 9, geometry say grade 10, algebra 2, grade 11, and if you take 4 years, well, maybe you'll take pre-calc. What about calc? Well, tough. Maybe you double up, you take 2 courses in high school, that's what they said. I want to see somebody taking, algebra 2 and geometry together or something similar. Some of them will, by the way, kids will do that, but not very many. And you need essentially more time. Well, I don't want to go to that one. The problem is we have supposedly high expectation in the high school. However, very few kids will be able to reach them. That's the real problem. In 1997, well, in 1999, when we started the STAR testing, we had 16% of children in grade 8 taking algebra. So even those days we had some fraction. It's not like this was zero. It wasn't zero. 16% took algebra early, and they had indeed 4 years to do from geometry and up, or algebra 2 and up to calculus. Who were those 16%? Mostly children of affluent parents, mostly children that got support from parents, from sibling, from external tutoring. Those were the elite. But there was some, it's not like zero, because parents are investing. Well, so we have some problems. Every set of standards has problems, right? Probably true. Except that some standards are better developed. And what you heard about Common Core, they really did not use evidence to place themselves, comparable to the international expectations. Let me go back to the issue of how important are the standards. Because a lot of people will say, well, here we have Massachusetts, great standard, thank you, Sandy. And they did very well. They moved from being mediocre plus to excellent. They're top of the nation. But what about California? Jim mentioned the 1992 math framework in California that caused the collapse of mathematics in California. In 1994, there was a NAEP testing. California came second from the bottom. Thanks God for Mississippi. That was basically such a scandal that caused us to accept and develop rigorous standards in 97, 98. Well, so we have rigorous standard, but we are not in a Massachusetts situation. We didn't rise to the top, but we were at the bottom. Massachusetts was not at the bottom. We were also undergoing major demographic changes. Well, let's see how California actually did over these 15 years of star testing. What you see here is essentially a chart showing the middle schools in California. So this is the achievement. The higher it is, the better they are. And this is the line that defines anything above that is advanced. This is the proficient line. And this is the fraction of students in the school, middle school, taking algebra. As you see, the more kids took algebra, the lower the grade as a rule, which is what you expect. Very few schools had very high scores, and they typically gave early algebra to very few students. This is 2004. Look at the picture in 2012. We learned, many of our schools learned how to move most of their students into algebra in middle grades, in other words, up to grade 8, and maintain pretty high scores. Not everybody, there are still people here. But a lot of schools move ahead, a lot. In fact, this is just a picture I like to show. Look at the difference between the 10 years made. We actually made a huge difference. However, this is, before however, this is the Algebra 1 success rate, taking n success rate by grade 8. As you see, here we start to get the proficient and above, which is the orange thing. You see it keeps growing. The blue and the red really don't grow anymore. But the number of takers overall grows. In real numbers, it's from about 50,000 to 170,000. Every year, 120,000 more students than the decade before successfully took Algebra 1 by grade 8. It's pretty amazing. Now, you can say, who cares? Algebra 1, early, late, big deal. What about what they do the rest of high school, right? Here is a chart of Algebra 2. Again, more takers, bigger success. But look at this chart, which is more interesting. This is broken down by demographics. And you see the difference between 2003 and 2012, for example, in low SES students here and here. It's a huge jump. You also see the jump in the white population, but much smaller. This is also closing the gap. But the same thing happened in Algebra 2 and in geometry. More takers, this is successful takers, by the way, proficient and advanced, not just taking. More successful takers, pronounced and focused on minority and disadvantaged group. That's exactly what one would like to see. This is calculus, AP calculus BC, AB and BC, same picture. Minorities are moving faster than the average. These are the ratios, by the way, of all these topics. And you see these numbers are much higher than the white column, which is here. That's exactly how success. More taking advanced courses and lifting the bottom. Wonderful. In fact, if you adjust for the demographic changes and for the fact that NAEP, which is the objective supposedly measure of our achievement, does not really contain much algebra, and in California, the majority of students until yesterday took algebra, that explains to a large degree why our numbers on NAEP improved just a little bit. From number before last, we ended up officially about number 10, 12 from the bottom, but if you adjust it, we are probably number 30 from the bottom, 20 from the bottom, which is not great, but it's not the bottom of the barrel anymore, and the demographic has changed. But this is the proof of the pudding. This is the CSU enrollment and acceptance. So on the bottom, you see the enrollment rates from 97 to 2013 of the white cohort. On the, okay, you have the total, and then you have the white and the Latino. And you see the Latino grows much faster and eventually takes over the white. At the same time, the remediation rate dropped from 50% to below 30%. Much more enrollment, better prepared. And these are you can just see the example of how the numbers flipped over this decade. Latino students are as able to do as any other student, except they need more support. They are harder to teach. The result is, because of family issues, because of affluence issues, but we were doing pretty well with them. Despite all these things, we moved up significantly. You don't hear these stories from Sacramento. Our past superintendents, if I can say on personal knowledge, they hate the old standard because they were unforgiving, they were obvious and clear, and anybody could achieve if he just worked hard. They didn't like the idea. They never publicized this kind of results. Well, where are we? I explained much of it, so I will not go to it anymore. The key to the success was strong preparation in case 7. Everybody had a chance to make it. Now, not everybody did make it. Not everybody went into algebra 1 by grade 8, but a lot of them did. By the end of the 13 years, we had 2/3 of the cohort taking algebra 1 by grade 8, with much higher success rate than before. So we not only enlarged the pool, the success of the pool was higher. This is enormous success. And the biggest beneficiaries, I repeat myself, were the minorities. What about Common Core? This is what about Common Core. K7 does not prepare children to take algebra in grade 8. So our Michael Kirst, our president of the state board, says, well, we expect schools to offer acceleration. And he's right. If you offer acceleration, surely some kids will get to algebra in grade 8. Wonderful. And who will be those kids? Oh, those 16% from 15 years ago, the affluent kid. Because, you know, many low SES kids don't get this support, don't get extracurricular tutoring. So we are going back 15 years. Early algebra is key to success because it leaves you enough time in high school to take advanced courses. You don't have to take all of them, but you have the chance, and you have the chance to repeat if necessary, but you have to be prepared. And our previous standard prepared us. Common Core does not. As simple as that. And in fact, look at the new framework. Oops, I have to finish. California actually discourages acceleration today. Look at the caveat. You shouldn't be rushed. It's a very serious thing. You should make sure that really prepared. I mean, really, but really prepared. And what's the result? These are data current data from few districts, and I got the information. Because since 2013, 2 years ago, when STAR test was stopped being given, we have no statewide data. But at least we have enrollment. So here is San Luis Coastal District from San Luis Obispo area. 316 2 years ago out of the cohort took Algebra 1, very successfully, by the way. This year, 46 of the same cohort, essentially. 46. My own district, Palo Alto, was a very high number taking algebra at this point, 92, very nice. Pretty good success. 30% drop. Even the best achieving district. Because many things. Because, first of all, kids are not prepared. Number two, the expectation is don't push the kids. You saw what the framework said. You're sure that they're ready for it? Make sure. Well, they're making sure. Just very few will get there. And this is the result. Laguna Beach just recently announced, oh no, we don't need any pre-calculus here. It's part of this diluted algebra 2 and geometry. Trust us. Yeah, right. Now, you go to the districts and you say, look, you don't have so many algebra students anymore. You have 46 instead of 300. What's wrong with you? And it's, oh, no, don't worry about it. Common Core grade 8 is as good as old algebra 2. In fact, it's better. That's how they explain. Because look, they're reading off a script. It's not that they understand algebra or algebra 2 or pre-algebra. They don't understand. But they read out a script somebody gave them. Well, I basically bothered to put down the algebraic content of our old pre-algebra on the left and the new Common Core 8 a year later on the right. Anything in purple is basically the same in both sides. Anything in blue is either in left or on the right, but not on both. Anything that is underlined in blue is actually important content. Because a lot of stuff there is peripheral standard. As you see, everything that essentially that we had in the pre-algebra is in Common Core or the other way around. Common Core 8, everything was in pre-algebra 7. There was one exception minor, there were many exceptions actually on the other side. So at best, Common Core grade 8 is equivalent to the old algebra 7, pre-algebra 7. Certainly not to algebra. And in fact, Common Core realized it. That's why they actually placed the algebra course in high school, not in grade 8. It's Common Core grade 8, it's not algebra. So that's what I said. Now, before I finish, and I have just 2 slides to finish, you should be anxious with me. Oh, I have 2 minutes to go? Wow. 3. I can start talking slowly. Basically the same way that Common Core from grade 3 and up develops until basically the end of K-12. The K-2, by the way, the K1, K2 are actually demanding. It's not fun even. It's overly demanding. So it's crazy because people say, oh, it's demanding. It's not demanding. Well, if you are K1 and K2, what you expect of kindergarten is foolish. It's overly foolish. However, you come to grade 3 and you slow down. And then you stay in the slow lane. This is interesting chart. This is the STAR data again, and it's basically the summary of all the mathematics tests from Algebra 1 and up throughout the 15 years. And you have 6 categories. So it's Algebra 1, Algebra 2, Geometry and Algebra 2, and then Integrated 1, Integrated 2, and Integrated 3. Because STAR test, in California standards, allowed 2 paths from the beginning. And you had 2 tests. You could select the integrated test and the integrated curriculum, or the regular course basing. When we started in 99 here, about 25% of the tests given were in the integrated section, which means about 25% of the students in California that took integrated mathematics, which is a significant number. Notice that over time, this number drops. In fact, here it's about 2%. So it went from 25 to 2. What happened? What happened is that students were assessed eventually on the same content throughout the 3 years of the mathematics, high school mathematics. And the students with integrated program lost lost big and districts started to run away from offering integrated mathematics because it's proven ineffective. Nobody forced them. The tests were there until the last moment, the integrated tests. Less and less people took them. Why do I mention it? Because in the era of Common Core also offers a choice, course-based or integrated. You may not hear about it because many superintendents will not tell you that you have these two options in the Common Core. They don't say, do it this way or do it this way. This is the content, do it one way or another. You have a choice. However, some districts, including California, that supposed to know this experience in the previous chart that I just showed you, decided not only to offer again, integrated in parallel to traditional course-based thing that the student or the parent can choose, offer only integrated. Only integrated. Well, what can I say? I guess they don't look at the evidence, so you will be the people that will suffer from the results. What can you do? You can demand access to the information about advanced mathematics enrollment in middle school, so either integrated one or algebra one. This data is public. This district don't publish it, but it's public, you can ask for it. You can go back to the STAR database on the CDE, the California Department of Education, and check what it was in 2013. 2013, right. If you see then a drop, like I showed you in St. Louis Coastal, from 300 to 40, you probably want to talk to the superintendent and say, what the heck is going on? Why no more students are entering these advanced classes, whether integrated or not integrated? What's wrong? What happened? Did the student become dumb? Did the teachers become dumb that they cannot teach? Or do we suddenly push the bar somewhere unexpectedly? Whatever it is, this is an early warning for you. So pay attention, demand the data, and scream if you don't like the results. Scream for explanations. Why does it happen? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? Second, demand both options as Common Core allows. Don't take some district that say, oh no, we love integrated because everybody and his brother are doing integrated. That's a lie. And again, in California, it has proven itself much less effective than the traditional course-based sequence. If you really have some push or pull with the district, try to get some local assessment, because smarter balanced test does not offer end-of-course testing in Algebra 1, Algebra 2, geometry. Basically, you're flying blind until you have hit the 11th grade test that we still don't know how good it will be. So we have no idea how well the students are doing other than whatever the teachers say. Now, teachers say something is somewhat important, but it's not always truthful. It's good to have external measure. 3 years flying blind, well, if you're a pilot. Anyway, let me finish with this slide. Oh, okay. Oh, I'm running out now. I stopped too slow. Basically, there is an issue of opting out of the test. And it was mentioned before, and let me say it. We have the right, as Californians, to opt out of the test by law. Even without the law, we have the right because we are the parents. But in this case, we have actually the right. So we can demand it, not just ask for it. Demand it. Only for the state test, not for the local district test. You don't have the right to opt out of the district test if you want to. The school can allow you to, but you don't have to. If participation, as was mentioned earlier, drops below 95%, this is old No Child Left Behind thing and STAR even before No Child Left Behind, the score is considered unreliable and hence invalid. Now, why is it important? It is important because if a school district decides to do its own thing, say, we want to stick to the old California standards. School districts are allowed to do that in California because the curriculum and the standards that are coming from Sacramento are advisory in nature. However, the test is not advisory. So the test will hold you to whatever Sacramento is pushing. And if you're not doing well on the test, Sacramento can start raising issues. So how come you are so bad? And certainly your neighboring towns will look at you and say, how come you are doing so badly on the very targeted test for particular thing of common core? However, if the score is unreliable, they cannot say anything. Because whatever the test says is meaningless. They always said it. Oh, it's less than 95%, it has no meaning. It's unreliable. Well, if they come to you and say, but you're doing badly, you kept your own old standards and you're badly on the test, so what? It doesn't mean anything. You just said it yourself a long time. In other words, the 5% is important. And last thing, somebody mentioned privacy, data privacy. California is lucky that we have supposedly a good privacy law. And this is true, we do. However, there is a problem. If we use a consortium test, which one of them is smarter balance, the other one is a park test, however good our local state law is, the consortium already signed an agreement 4 years ago, with the US Department of Education to provide them all data of students taking the consortia test at the student level, full data. Well, as long as California uses smarter balance, whether California law says A or B or C, doesn't matter. The consortium already has an agreement in place that probably will supersede it. And we were pushing the US Department of Education to say, well, we didn't mean it. No. They say, oh, we are not doing it now. Right, because there are no tests taken now. So, the FERPA at the federal level has been modified. It really does not protect the privacy of your data. And as long as you're taking the smarter balance assessment, California law is basically toothless. I think this is my last, so I will stop here. No, that's fine. Come to get out if you forget it. No. Okay, let's stop here. Thank you.
Okay, how's everyone doing? Okay, we're running out of time. I know we started late, but just stand up and sit down. Just stand up and sit down. Okay, and I'm just going to introduce Sandra while you're standing up and sitting down. So, lovely Sandra. I got to know Sandra last spring. She stayed with me, and we had lots of conversations. And she is a gem. Sandra Stotsky is Professor of Education Emerita at the University of Arkansas, where she held the 21st Century Chair in Teacher Quality. She served as Senior Associate Commissioner at the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education from 1999 to 2003, where she was in charge of developing or revising all of the state's K-12 standards, teacher licensure tests, and teacher and administrator licensure regulations. She served on the Massachusetts Board of Elementary and Secondary Education from 2006 to 2010, on the National Mathematics Advisory Panel from 2006 to 2008, and on the Common Core Validation Committee from 2009 to 2010. She was one of the 5 members of the Validation Committee who would not sign off on the standards as being internationally benchmarked, rigorous, or research-based. She was also editor of the premier research journal, Research in the Teaching of English, published by the National Council of Teachers of English from 91 to 97. She has published extensively in professional journals and written several books. Sandra Stotsky also is credited with developing one of the country's strongest sets of academic standards for K-12 students, as well as the strongest academic standards and licensure tests for prospective teachers, while serving as Senior Associate Commissioner in the Massachusetts Department of Education from 1999 to 2003. She served as a major consultant on previous California state standards in English language arts. Dr. Stotsky was the unique standards expert in English language arts on the Common Core Validation Committee. Please help me to welcome Dr. Sandra Stotsky.
this down. That was obviously, I'll give it to you. Thank you very much. I'm going to fill in some of the ELA details in this very depressing outline of what happened and how you have the kind of standards you now have in California, especially given that you had a set of some of the best standards in the country only a few years ago in all 4 subjects, and you're going to be losing the other 2 if you haven't lost them already this year. The ones for science and the ones for history and geography and the other social studies. Let me begin by talking about the 4 major excluded groups, and then I will go back to them as we go through some of the details in the English language arts picture. There were, from my perspective, and I was watching and involved from almost the beginning, there were 4 major groups who were excluded from participation in the development of these standards. First were parents. Now, they don't necessarily belong in the standards development group, but they weren't even there as a response group at any time. Second group were teachers themselves, especially high school teachers of math and English, the 2 groups you might think should be on. Standards Committee for college readiness standards, and maybe you would think that college professors who teach math and English to freshmen and sophomores might be the only group. The other group that should be there, well, they were not there either for the most part. So they may have been in review groups, but they weren't among the standards development writers, standards development work group, which was a group that developed the college readiness standards in the spring of 2009, and they weren't among the writers. Now, 3 groups so far. Two groups. We've talked about parents and we've talked about teachers. State legislators were also absent as a group, people who pay the bills, and then local school board officials. Basically, they're all the groups that really have to do with local education in this country, and they were nowhere to be seen in the development of these standards. And you know they were developed by private groups in Washington, D.C., National Governors Association, Council for Chief State School Officers, and their spin-off for the NGA, Achieve, and they were funded by a 4th private group, the Gates Foundation. That is why the whole process is totally non-transparent. You can't FOIA anything, no records, nothing can be made available. So to this day, this is now 5 years later, we have no way of finding out why particular people were chosen for these committees, what their credentials were, what their charge was, what they were paid. None of this information is available. All we learn is what the organizations have chosen to make available as information. First group, as I mentioned, standards development work groups, worked in the spring of 2009 to develop the first set of so-called college readiness standards. I'm going to use the word so-called consistently because they are not college readiness standards. This was the gimmick, the name that was chosen for these standards. They're not ordinary standards, they're college readiness standards. And most of the people on this committee were associated with the testing industry. So that should have been the first clue to our media, which was clueless, that there was something somewhat wrong, but we never heard from our media. They simply have never been trained, apparently, to ask the kinds of questions that should be asked. What else can one say? They have been consistently unable to ask any of the questions about the development of these documents you would have expected from some journalist somewhere. We then have the standards writers, and you've heard about those 3 that were in math. There were 3 who were lead writers in English, and they were, as I have pointed out on many occasions, unqualified to write English language arts standards. David Coleman was the lead writer. He has now become the president of the College Board for $750,000 a year. He has no experience in tests and assessment, but his background is in classical philosophy, wasn't in English to begin with. Sue Pimentel was an elementary teacher, I should say a Head Start teacher with an elementary degree and a law degree. She has taught only Head Start. The two of them had never taught K-12 or anything above K-12. They had never published anything in K-12 education. They had no record of serious interest in K-12 from their own initiative. And the third person, James Patterson, was associated with ACT. To this day, we have no idea what he did with the ELA standards. He sort of disappeared from sight. He was one of them, but we just don't know exactly what he did, if anything. He had been with ACT for many, many years, middle school assessment issues connected with ACT. So you have a sort of peculiar writing committee for the standards, a vast array of people in a review group, and then the validation committee, which consisted of 25 to ultimately 29 members. And as Jim has mentioned, there were only two of us who could be considered the experts in either math or English, language arts, and the rest were a variety of administrators or few teachers in the lower level, elementary teachers, and then some others connected to the testing industry as well, including the person who was director of assessments for PISA, programs for international student assessment, which raised the question, what was he doing there? We still don't know. I mean, you'd have to make an inference on your own, because it's a test of 15-year-olds and skills, and you'll see why I mention that in a few minutes. So we have a rather odd assortment of people on these committees developing what they all knew would be national standards, and they have many flaws. You've heard about the problems with math. What are the problems with ELA? I urge you to take out what I believe was inside your program, and you have a page titled Flaws in Common Core's English Language Arts and Literacy Standards. Most of the document is about the ELA standards. It's a document of about 65 pages and up to about 57, 58. It's all about English language arts, and then there are about 7 or 8 pages on so-called literacy standards for other subjects in the curriculum. That is where the damage is for the other subjects in the curriculum. But the problems with the English language arts standards I've tried to boil down here. The overall problem with these standards is that they are really not standards, they're skills. And to make it clear what I mean by a standard, I'm going to read from your old California standards, which were among the best. This is what has been junked by your Board of Education. Here is a literature standard for grades 11 and 12 in your old document. And it's under the section called Literary Response and Analysis. 3.7, analyze recognized works of world literature from a variety of authors. Under that broader heading, the first sub-objective is contrast the major literary forms, techniques, and characteristics of the major literary periods, for example, Homeric Greece, medieval, romantic, neoclassic, modern. That gets you to the content for a standard. This is why it's important. It gives the student the reason for studying literary and acquiring literary knowledge. And then the second sub-objective is relate literary works and authors to the major themes and issues of their eras. So here you have the literary historical knowledge that you would expect students to acquire in an English-speaking country. And this is a true standard. It doesn't specify specific works because that respects the autonomy of the English teacher. English teachers can choose whatever work they think would represent to them Homeric Greece, which would most likely be the Iliad, the Odyssey, or the Aeneid, and so forth. But it gives the teacher and the student some narrower aspect of literary history to develop some acquaintance with. That's why it's a standard. It has some content to it. And the other part, the historical aspects, give you the other piece that you need for acquiring some literary historical knowledge. Now, there are people who might say, well, who cares? Because there's nothing like it in Common Core. Why is some literary historical knowledge important for those students who graduate from American high schools? It's important for understanding the English language they use, whether it is for public discourse or for personal understanding of something that they can use themselves for expression, for their own creativity. But most important, and this always was the rationale in most public high schools in this country, you took 4 years of English so that you could understand the language of civic discourse. And therefore, you had to understand its literature, especially its complex literature, because the two most important influences on the English language, as has been found by some empirical research that was done around 1940 or so, the two most important influences on the content of the English language, as you can imagine, would have been Shakespeare and the King James Version of the Bible. So there would be a reason to have some historical literary study of the language so that you then can understand metaphors, literary allusions, other things that you would see imagery in even the language of an editorial. In other words, it applies beyond writing poetry or literature. It's to be able to read educated English. Well, that is a true standard. And what is a Common Core standard? I give you an example in section 3, and I've already biased by saying it's a murky and badly written standard, but you will see what is a fairly typical standard, as it is called, in Common Core. It's a literature standard for 9 and 10. It asks students to determine a theme or central idea of a text, analyze in detail its development over the course of the text, including how it emerges and is shaped and refined by specific details, semicolon, provide an objective summary of the text. Now, aside from being a jumble of several different activities, it is the kind of sentence that the kind of English teacher I had in high school would have completely marked up and rejected. It's not a good sentence. And if you look at the standards before it and the so-called standards that come after it in that particular strand from grade to grade, you will see that it's barely paraphrased and paraphrased very poorly from grade to grade. It's still not clear what it means, no matter how you paraphrase it. So one of the first tasks given to English teachers in this country after Common Core was adopted by their State Board of Ed was to unpack the standards so you could figure out and interpret what it meant. Now, you obviously don't have a standard if you've got to unpack what is in it and then have differing interpretations. What the test developers will do is something we will have to find out. What do they mean by it? I gave this statement, along with others, to over 24 literary scholars at a conference in Bloomington, Indiana last year, and they were the ones who immediately pointed out that it was a self-contradictory sentence. At the end, you provide an objective summary of the text, but all the rest is interpretation. So you do not even have something that makes sense to a well-trained, well-read English teacher. This is part of the problem, and you have to ask yourself, how did we get such kinds of standards? I've tried to explain earlier that those people who were charged with writing them were not qualified. Was this ever pointed out, raised as questions by anyone? No. Not that I know of, but that is what we have been saying as critics. At least I have been saying this about the ELA standards writers for 5 years. Is it ever addressed? No. So now we are stuck because you have got these very badly written standards for the most part as your state standards, and the very good standards you had were junked for whatever reason your state board chose. And you can't change any of these or write them over because Common Core standards, as you probably know by now, have been copyrighted by the private organizations that developed them. So you have privately copyrighted standards that had to be adopted verbatim. You can't change them. Yes, you could add 15%, few standards above and below or something. You could add cursive writing if you wanted to do that. But you couldn't change the standards because Common Core's tests, Smarter Balance, will be based on whatever Common Core has in it as its standards. But there are other problems today, and I want to get to the present right now because we've been going to many communities in the state and listening to many parents. And one of the things I've begun to realize, and I'm saying this now knowing that Secretary of Education Arne Duncan is going to be here tomorrow giving a talk on some aspects of Common Core. He thinks we should have children in school for a longer day, all year long, and redistribute so-called effective teachers, whatever that means. We haven't heard the details on that. But we have had, for the past 2 years, a growing revolt by parents, both mothers and fathers, but mainly mothers, who from coast to coast have been looking at what their children are doing in school and becoming more and more upset. Has there been any response to the parents anywhere? This is something I noticed because I was a very active tiger mom in my own community with my own children years ago. Do you have school committees that have responded? Do you have a governor who's responded? Do you have a secretary of education or anybody who has helped to set policy, your state board of ed, your department of ed, anybody at all who has said, maybe we need to look at what's happening. Maybe we need to suspend or delay the test or get together some teachers, do something, because there are an awful lot of unhappy parents. Instead, you have articles in the newspaper about these zany or conservative or white suburban moms, as Arne Duncan mentioned, so you begin to suspect there's some little agenda there that you weren't being told about. So you have a problem with a lack of response to parents. What is going on with these standards? We also have no response to whatever the teachers are saying. It isn't like they're not also the victims of whatever's going on. Teachers have been very reticent. They're being told that as we were told, at least I was told at a meeting outside of Peoria in Illinois several weeks ago by a union representative, that teachers would have the word insubordination put on their personnel file if they even attended a meeting where there was somebody speaking who was critical of Common Core. When have we ever had anything like this in this country? Insubordination is something that a school system defines as it wishes. So if teachers say anything negative to anyone else in a school, to a parent, even casually, or show up at a meeting where they can be identified, they can be deemed guilty of insubordination. In addition to which, we are being told that effective teachers may be redistributed. What that really means, as I say, we don't know. Move them from one county to another, from Alaska to Iowa. We don't know what it means. But Arne Duncan will drop that shoe when he's ready. And then, of course, if everyone is locked in with a test, what can you do if you want a job? There has been no response to the legislation that has been produced in the last 2 years by any formal source that I know of, except criticism. About 25 to 30 states have tried to pass different kinds of bills. Some of them are trying to defund or delay the implementation of the tests, to defund the technology infrastructure that is going to cost a fortune. Others are just trying to get out of Common Core, develop strong first-class standards, figure out what to do in the interim. Whatever it is, there has been no response to these efforts that one could say shows that there is an acknowledgement that this project is a train wreck and it is getting worse. It's not getting better, no matter how much funding the Gates Foundation puts into its initial investment. We do not even have much happening at the local school board level, although that may be changing within the next year because of recent election results. I know that in Massachusetts, for the first time a few days ago, I saw a resolution by the Association of Local School Committees in Massachusetts. Every state has one. Yours would be the Association of California School Boards or the California Association of Local School Boards. But that resolution asked for a review of Common Core's standards, and it passed by an overwhelming vote. It was just a resolution, but the fact that at least local school officials, called committees in Massachusetts, are speaking through their official state they're not daring to speak up as individuals, most of them, but they're willing to speak up through their official state organization. That says something. And it is through those organizations that these groups belong to that may be the way in which we'll finally hear. Unions, we know, have been speaking up a little bit about delaying implementation. They are very reluctant to actually ask for the elimination of Common Core standards because that creates a problem with their disobeying state policy. And for many teachers, if they did anything or were recognized, it might mean a suspension or a revocation of their license. So I understand that. But unions can be freer than they are about what they see as the issues at the national and at the state level, less so at the local level. But at the local level, local school boards everywhere, including California, do have the authority to eliminate Common Core as their standards and to ask for a curriculum directed towards better standards. And at least in California, you are blessed with wonderful first-rate standards to go back to. Every school board, county or independent smaller unit could be doing that in California. But that would not solve the problem alone. After all, we've had a 50-year, roughly, decline in public education in this country before Common Core. Common Core is not the cause of all of our problems. Problems go back far longer than Common Core has been around, the idea of national standards. And the roots of it lie, to a large extent, not wholly, but to a large extent, in teacher training. So our education schools need to be totally reformed if we are to accomplish any strengthening of public education in this country. And that is what my next book, which will be coming out in March, will be dealing with. I have how many minutes left? None? 1.5. All right, I'll speak fast. Okay, that book is going to be about the licensure regulations and tests. Not a very sexy subject, but it happens to be a very important one, and very few people understand teacher licensing regulations. It's a very bizarre document to look at. It's almost incomprehensible in most states. And licensure tests, which all teachers now, in every prospective teachers, have to take because of a provision in the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act in 1998 under the Clinton administration. This is still in effect, and every state has to make sure that its prospective teachers are taking a licensure test, as they do for most other professions. But most of the tests they take are at the elementary to lower high school level. Now we're talking about college graduates, so you have to think about the problem we're facing with open access to teacher preparation, and no other country would face that. So that is where we would want to begin with reform. And the last, for about a minute, I want to point out that parents can do another thing here in California. If the third grade report card form I was given yesterday morning for Newport Mesa Unified School District is typical of what parents are going to be seeing no matter where they are in California. I have no idea where the template for this form came from, but there are learning outcomes at the end of it that suggest that that is what the teacher will be mainly looking for. However they grade it, what they grade it on, we have no idea. But learning outcomes are such things as community contributor. This was for grade 3. Self-directed learner, complex thinker. There are several others, but you would have to ask, what is that poor grade 3 teacher going to evaluate a student on if they're going to give a grade for complex thinking? I asked the parent to suggest maybe independent thinking instead of complex thinking. Try something, but get some answers to questions about where this form came from. It didn't come from Mars. It had to have come from Sacramento.
Okay, we're going to start. This is going to be a quick Q&A. They hopefully have answered your questions, but there are a few here that I think are warrant some attention that were not really answered. And I'm going to pass this microphone over to Dr. Milgram in particular. And the question is, what possible motive could there be behind the ridiculously low math standards? And then a continuation of this that I would like the rest of you to answer is what, as a teacher, we've talked about what parents can do, but as teachers, what can teachers do? So why do we have these ridiculously low standards? What is the motive behind this? And what can teachers do about it? Dr. Milgram.
Well, don't hope for much from me. Because the answer is, there are conjectures about what's behind the low standards, but none of these conjectures, frankly, are appropriate for public consumption. So I will not comment further on that.
Okay, next.
Oh, could you then answer, what could teachers do? What can teachers do to? Mm-hmm.
That's harder, in a funny way, that's harder. Here's the problem that you get. You come back to the things that Sandy was talking about at the end of her talk or speech or whatever it was. There were no slides there.
You love the slides.
So what was she talking about? Well, she was talking about the preparation teachers are given for teaching by the schools, the nation's education schools. And what it does is it provides, in particular in mathematics, it provides an absolutely minimal requirement for both high school and elementary school. Basically, there's sort of only one course in mathematics that's kind of required, and that's a course, and sort of one of the first course that is the lowest numbered course. Let's say it that way, in all of the high schools. And privately, that course by the faculty tends to be called Math for Vegetables. Okay, this creates a problem, because when you've got a situation where the material you're working with is not designed to carry itself, and you have to revise it, then you have as a teacher, you have a very, very difficult situation that you're facing because you're not trained to do that. You're just not trained to do that. The fact of the matter is you don't know enough about mathematics to be able to get the wheat from the shaft, whack, whatever. And you know, and so it just gets incredibly difficult.
Would one of the other you like to say anything, Sandra, about what can teachers do? Okay. Then since science is really tied with math, so if the math is only reaching a certain level, what does that do for science proficiency?
This is a question that isn't a question. You know, I mean, it's obvious what the lack of decent math does for science. Part of the reason that certain things are in the algebra, in the geometry, in the trigonometry, is for what I guess educators call articulation, where you're providing things that are going to be needed by physics when they're needed by physics, and you're going to provide things that are needed by chemistry when the chemistry needs them. And, you know, if those things are not present, and they generally are not present, then it's a real problem.
Can I add the word here? Yeah, I guess I can. Let me mention that California did adopt the new generation science standard. Next generation, it's not new generation. Well, okay. It doesn't change the nature of the standard, whether it's new or next. There is the Thomas Fordham Institute in Washington routinely evaluates standards. They evaluated the Common Core and they like it for some of them academic reasons, some of them not so academic reasons. However, they did evaluate also the science standard. And even they, who are great promoters of this Common Core or national standard, found the standards at a C level. California was at A. They said that Common Core, not the NGSS, does not use mathematics of Common Core to support science. In fact, there's barely any mathematics in those science standards. It's talking about things. It's not calculating, evaluating, analytically anything. So maybe indeed these are fitting standards for the Common Core mathematics. What can I say?
Okay, if this is a question about opting out of tests and parents' concerns, if they opt their children out of the tests, can this what can the school do to them? Can they fail the students?
She's mic'd.
I don't think I'm wired up.
Okay, well,
Use
if you're
the
not
mic.
wired up,
Okay.
use the mic.
I thought I was. Okay. At this point, and actually in terms of legal authority, there should be no penalties of any kind for students whose parents have opted them out. If there are any consequences at all, they should be determined by the local school board. That is where policy should be made, not by a school superintendent, any other kind of administrator. What I have suggested, and I don't know whether this is happening, I see I should hold this closer. When parents opt out their children, they should request that an instructional session be given instead. In other words, they can send their child to school for the day. The child is registered as having been in school, so it's not an attendance issue. There's no truancy issue. There's no absence. But the school should be able to provide some instruction to that child if the parent requests that instead of standardized test based on Common Core. But the school board is the appropriate place for that kind of policy to be worked out, and that is what should happen. But the school can't put kids in a closet, put them out in the playground, send them out, sit on the grass and read a book, or whatever I've heard some schools are doing. All of that is illegal if it has not been voted on by the local school board, who can be held accountable for that policy.
I would just add that this is true in general, but in California we do have the legal right to opt out. So anything else is vengeance, and this should be treated by lawsuits and other misbehavior by the authorities. They should not be able to do this.
I would also add one of the strategies I'd like to use is, since we believe in transparency, we want transparency, school board members, staff, they say they are transparent. If they are, then they shouldn't have a problem when they send out the information about the upcoming tests, having a little line down there that says, you have the right to opt your child out of testing.
Actually, this is not true.
No?
Unfortunately, no. The school boards, the school district have to administer it, and I think by regulation they cannot actually urge or proselytize or inform parents of the right. However, the rights are not secret. It's like jury nullification. You can do it, but you cannot instruct the audience.
That we have to take to Sacramento. We have to change that. Okay, so this is another question that isn't really a question. Then, do we anticipate a degrading of college curricula as a result of the implementation of these standards?
Absolutely. It's just a matter of logic. What happens is there's another little piece of the agreements that one makes in the typical state that tie into the adoption or even application for Race to the Top money. That is to say that if a student passes this exam, the 11th grade exam that in mathematics goes to weak algebra 2, then that student if that student's admitted to any public university or college in the state, then the first course that student takes there must count for credit. And what does that mean? Well, it means that the first course that hasn't been covered is trigonometry. So trigonometry, which is right at the margin in a community college, it's most of the time for credit, sometimes not. And in a university, a four-year college or two-year college, or well, four-year college or university, virtually always it's remedial. That will be credit-bearing. So the student will come in, they will take trigonometry when they should have been taking pre-calc or calc. And if the schools want to get their state money, if they say, you know, at this rate you're going to take 6 years to graduate, that doesn't work very well. So what has to happen is that the requirements for a math degree, or for a lot of the other degrees, will have to be reduced. And that means that they don't take the summit courses in whichever major they're majoring in, if it's a technical area. So I think in all these technical areas, totally safe to say it is going to have a serious, dramatic effect. And comment on what kind? Well, a lot more bridges are going to fall down than have fallen down recently. There was the one in Minnesota, but a lot more are going to start falling down.
Okay, could one of you talk about the relationship of the standards with the SAT, and also if we were to return to the previous standards, how would that affect the SAT, et cetera?
Can I change something? The SAT is being adjusted to align with Common Core. In fact, that's one of the big problems, because homeschoolers and private schoolers often need the SAT to show their achievement and come with it to college. That's their way to college. If the SAT is adjusted to the Common Core, guess what? Common Core shows up in homeschooling by default. This is terrible. If we go back, what was the second part of the question?
If we were to go back to the state standards.
Right. So if we go back to the previous state standard, until SAT is adjusted, it would, I think, strengthen the students in the state. Once the SAT is adjusted, truly I cannot tell you. One of the problems with the testing of Common Core is not necessarily that it's so difficult, because the material is pretty watered down. But you have heard, I'm sure, how terrible the pilot testing last year was. How demanding, how frustrating, how difficult, how the results were. How can it be that they are so terrible if the content is so low? That's a fair question. I hope somebody asked it in the questions. The fact is that the smarter balance is not asking you about your math knowledge, and I'm talking about math because I don't know much more. It asks you about, show us how you can repeat essentially what you were taught in class to address this problem the way we showed you. Not that you come to the right result in that way or another way. In other words, don't solve the problem. Show me how you reached the problem, and I have to bless the way you reached it. So the wording is very obscure, convoluted, and then if you reach the result in the different way that they intended, and you have to guess what they intended, you will be docked points. Doesn't matter whatever the result. So it's very easy to make hard questions even on trivial material. Just complicate it and put the bar very high. But the content often in these questions is pretty low, the mathematics content. But the words are very complicated. The prompt is very complex, very confusing. So the question is hard. What did they mean? What do they... And if you don't speak English well, don't even think about it. This is really a test of reading, not of math. The math in both these problems is trivial. At the grade level that you're talking about, it's 2 grades below. But the question is complex, confusing.
Okay. I know Sandra Stotsky will be able to answer this question about the new way of teaching where it emphasizes group learning versus an individual learner.
Tell you that there was a very thorough review of group learning in the National Mathematics Advisory Panel's test group, and some of it found its way into the final report. There are only certain kinds of group formations that actually have some evidence to show that kids learn from them. Robert Slavin is the author of most of these research reports, but it has to be structured in a way so that all kids are held accountable for a piece of the project. But that is not what seems to be happening. We actually don't have any empirical data on the kind of group learning that's being done in the name of Common Core. It is not directly in Common Core's standards per se, but it is part of the pedagogy that is being promoted for getting to one of the great so-called skills that Common Core wants, which is collaborative skills. If you prize, and that is one of the learning outcomes I noticed on this report card that I mentioned, that students are to learn that it is essential. This isn't even a skill or a standard. This was under community contributor. Understands that it is essential for people to work together. This is grade 3. Yeah, so as soon as you see the word that, you know you have a doctrine that is being imposed, because that, understand that is not a standard, it's not a skill, it's not a process. You want kids to learn something. It's a doctrine. It's dogma. And this is how I used to try to explain the difference between a dogma, doctrine, and a skill or a process or a strategy. That little word, that, is very important, but the point is that collaborative skills are being stressed. So the group learning is putting kids in groups of 4, typically with a more able student as one of the 4. And when I asked somebody just the other day who was in grade 10 about the group project they had just done for the English class, they were to write a short op-ed type essay based on some current topic in the news. Forget the irrelevance of the topic itself that they wrote on. I said, who starts the first sentence? She said, well, one person wrote the whole thing. The grade then becomes the grade for all 4 students. Now, this isn't just poor pedagogy. There are different types of groups that are recommended in the pedagogical literature, any kind of group. And the kind of group that we have research evidence for is very difficult for teachers to manage. It takes time. It takes time away from actually teaching knowledge. So you have a different problem in that the more time the teacher spends making sure that the groups get along with each other. I've seen research manuscripts where kids didn't like whoever was in their group, so the teacher had to spend time figuring out how to rearrange the group to get kids who actually got along with each other. And this happens all the way up through college level, because I've looked at group formation at all levels. Oh, sure. That's in some of the directions, because you want a diverse group and you want diversity in different ways, and somebody has to be capable of teaching the others, because the teacher isn't going to be teaching the groups. The teacher is going to be walking from group to group to make sure they are doing the assignment. I've watched this process. It takes a lot of time to do that kind of activity, and there are many children who resent it. We know that.
Okay, because of time, we're going to wrap this up. I know there were several questions. Thank you. There were several questions about, can we get the PowerPoint? Yes. Can we get, okay. So, you know, we have over here a matrix download where you can like just stand there and it'll download all the information. Wouldn't that be amazing if we could do that? So we will have the PowerPoints available. Also, this was filmed today, thanks to Dr. Jim Davies. We have this filmed.
I thought I was holding it.
Of course, yeah.
Oh, yes. Handouts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Missing standards documents can be freely used.
I'd like to see some of these points.
Yeah.
I urge you to give
Yeah.
them to as many school board members. Oh, I urge you to give these handouts to school board members as well as the high school and English and math chair. That's why they're on 1 page or 2 pages, because it's not a lot of reading.
If you want to get the opt-out forms, we have them on our website at sdcqe.com. You can get the opt-out forms there if you elect to do that. And I want to thank the panelists for coming and driving and traveling and sharing. I would like to thank Darcy Brandon for pulling this whole thing together. And I'd like to just finish with, there is no AstroTurf here. This is grassroots all the way, and I hope you'll do something amazing with the information tonight. Thank you very, very much.